So we've had this whole discussion about the Constitution, and I think if you asked most people on the street to identify some part of the Constitution, to the extent that you were to get any kind of answer about that, I'm sure the vast majority of people would point to some provision of the Bill of Rights. That's easily the most well-known thing about our Constitution today for lots of reasons, for no other reason that people watch shows about cops and robbers and see people getting read their rights all the time. So that's something that for us today in our culture we think is synonymous with the Constitution. For the framers, however, of course, it wasn't in the original Constitution. And not only was it not in the original Constitution, but many of the framers, in fact, there's a whole Federalist paper, number 84, where it's argued that a Bill of Rights is not only unnecessary, but potentially even dangerous to the Constitution. And this is a big point of contention between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And it's really the one thing that the Anti-Federalists successfully push for is the addition of a Bill of Rights, which is done almost immediately upon the convening of the new government. From the point of view of the Federalists, why wouldn't the Bill of Rights have been such a big deal? After all, in most of the state constitutions, there are bills of rights, and furthermore, these bills of rights are put right up front. They're in many of the state constitutions. They're the most prominent part of those state constitutions. And if you look at Federalist 84, you'll see Hamilton kind of mocking this and sort of teasing the states for it, and saying, these things kind of belong in more in a treatise of ethics than they do in an actual practical constitution of government. Well, why is that? One of the first things that Hamilton points out about a Bill of Rights is he says, those asking for a Bill of Rights, they want a Bill of Rights partly because as English subjects, we had Magna Carta. And that's really what a model for a Bill of Rights would be based on. We had Magna Carta. And a critical point that Hamilton makes in the Federalist is that Magna Carta is really important because the British were in a monarchy. Right? The principles of monarchy are very different than the principles of republicanism. And what happened with the Magna Carta, he says, is the barons went sword in hand to King John. And the assumption of monarchy is all power originally resides with the crown. Right? The king can do whatever he wants. And so the barons went to the king and said, okay, that's the general rule here. We're now going to carve out some exceptions to that rule. And so, yes, all power resides with the crown, except you can't do A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth. And that's the assumption of the Magna Carta, that if some protection isn't listed in the Magna Carta, the assumption is the crown can do it. Now, Hamilton explains, if that's your system, you absolutely want a Magna Carta or a Bill of Rights, and you want the most extensive Bill of Rights that you can get, right? Because the more exceptions you name, the more liberty you have. That's not our system. In a republic, all power resides where originally? Not with government, with the people, right? There is no government other than what the people create, and it doesn't have any power beyond what the people give to it. So the rule is the people have the power. And so there's no need to carve out some exception to that, because the rule for us is if a power isn't specifically enumerated, if it's not explicitly granted to the government, the assumption is the government does not have it. And so the idea of a Bill of Rights is antithetical. You're carving out exceptions to powers that were never granted in the first place. And that might have the danger of implying a kind of monarchic understanding of the power of government in a republican system. And certainly we can see today the truth of Hamilton's words. Isn't it a general assumption in our political culture that the government may basically do whatever it wants, that if there's some need, well, the government must obviously have the power to respond to it, unless you can point to some specific provision in the Bill of Rights which says, no, you can't do that. That's the assumption we have today. It's actually not a truly Republican assumption, and it's a big problem. The other major point that Hamilton makes against the need of adding a Bill of Rights is to ask, what's the best way to protect your liberty? What's the best way? There are two alternatives. There's what the Anti-Federalists asked for. Let's list all of your liberties down on a piece of paper. And the more liberties you list, the more liberties you have, right? One of the exercises I will sometimes do in my classes is to go get a constitution, say, from the old Soviet Union, and to have the students read it. And you will see there in many of these constitutions long lists of the people's liberties. Rights to peaceably assemble, petition the government, and all of that. Things that if you actually tried to do them in that regime, you'd be shot immediately. Well, they're there on a piece of paper, but there's no structure of government that actually gives those words any way of being enforced. So Hamilton thinks that is a totally pointless exercise. The real defense of your liberty, and the phrase that Hamilton uses in Federalist 84, is to say the Constitution is itself in every respect a Bill of Rights. What you want is a Constitution that is structured in such a way so that there's real limits and there's real ways of enforcing those limits on government. The key is in the mechanics. The key is in the design, what he called in Federalist 9 the science of politics. That's what limits government, not some list of things on a piece of paper which government can ignore whenever it wishes.